Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 2nd of November, 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. My goodness, events in the United Kingdom moving very, very quickly indeed. I'm going to say as the wheels come off the Conservative wagon. But of course, who's to blame? Well, it's the Russians.
Absolutely. So as we mentioned the other day, Michael Fallon has resigned. Well, we didn't mention he had resigned the other day, but he resigned yesterday. But he didn't really say that he apologised for touching Mr. Putin's knee, but I'm sure he would have if that's what he had done. But Brian, unfortunately, he seems to have touched other people's knees, and for some reason, this is sufficient for him to resign. We'll come on to why that might be a little later, but you know, what are your thoughts on his resignation?
Well, I always pay attention to people's faces, and I was intrigued to see what Mr. Fallon, or is it Mr. Fallon? I'm not sure what we should call him these days. Indeed. But what he looked like as he spoke to the BBC. So we've got a little before and after here. This one to me is Michael Fallon. This is the man that we've been used to. Smug arrogance, deeply arrogant man, very puffed up with his own importance, so elevated from a specialist in children's nurseries to in charge of defence of this nation and our security. Let's have a look at him after the event. Well, this is his face as he started to speak to the BBC. And I read all sorts of things into this. I can see almost a petulant anger as to what's happened, and that has got some interesting connotations. I've labelled it here nervous foreboding, because this man is looking a bit like we've seen Treason May looking into a dark hole somewhere. So has he done something? Has he not? Well, we're not too clear on that, but what we know is that whatever he has done was enough for the lever to move him on.
Now, of course, his successor has been announced. We'll come on to that shortly. But this morning on BBC's Today programme on Radio 4, Lord Dannatt was being interviewed about the resignation. And there he is. He, of course, is former Chief of General Staff. Well, he said that the resignation of Sir Michael Fallon is a tragedy on two levels. It's a personal tragedy for him, but it's a tragedy for defence. Because he's been a very good Secretary of State for Defence. He's been in post for some 3.5 years, and defence is a complicated portfolio to master, and spending a bit of time in that appointment is really, really important to be able to understand the detail, to be able to understand the personality and the needs of the Army, the Navy and the Air Force, and he got that. And critically, he had also begun to understand and begun to champion that defence is underfunded in this country at the present time. And if you remember at the Conservative Party conference, he was starting to make the case for increasing the defence budget. A new Secretary of State for Defence will find it very difficult to have the confidence to master the brief and start making the case in the way that Michael Fallon was doing. And he went on to say that a very strong case to be made for promoting from within. So he's speaking about Fallon's possible successor. Very strong case to be made from promoting from within the Ministry of Defence, and that there are some very good candidates there from within the MOD. Mark Lancaster, Tobias Elwood, Freddie Howe, Earl Howe, if the Prime Minister could afford the political risk, he said, of having a member of the House of Lords as his Secretary of Defence. So he went on to say that Michael Fallon was a very honourable man, that if you recall recently there was an issue relating to one of the Royal Navy submarines where it was reported that Michael Fallon spoke very roundly to the First Sea Lord, he said. And if that's the case on an issue of sexual nature, then I think it's entirely honourable for the Defence Secretary himself, if he feels that he has let the side down, that he has done the honourable thing and resigned. So let's bring David Ellis in at this point and say, David, do you agree that Michael Fallon was a fantastic Secretary of State for Defence, and do you agree that Michael Fallon has behaved in an honourable manner?
If I was a politician or a lord, perhaps, I would say yes and sing his praises. and then try and drift in exactly what I was trying to preempt or state some sort of case within what I was saying, which is exactly what Dannett has done there. If you're asking me, stone cold, Dave Ellis, without a political, without the potential of a political seat, and the Conservative or the Labour Party offering me a seat, no. Most of the senior officers, most of the middle ranks, most of the ratings are all saying it is utter breakdown. And we've got to sort of look at really the job. The job of Minister of Defence is about securing money from the Treasury and going off and building stuff. It's easy to muster an army, and they get trained, and we're pretty good at that, or we used to be, if we're not cutting them. But the majority of it with Air Force, Navy, and so on and so forth is about building stuff. It's about engineering, and it's about being on your toes and taking a leaf out of Admiral Jackie Fisher's book. So what we've got here, really, folks, is a bit of a kind of load of nonsense, because touching someone's knee, you can't get fired for that. That's a load of rubbish. So what I'm saying here is quick, guys, let's go and get the Jack Profumo manual out and just have a rerun of those papers and just have a real good look at this, because there's some shenanigans going on here, some proper shenanigans.
David, I'll just come back in if I may. As usual, you've hit the nail on the head with indicating we should be looking in the direction of Profumo. We'll be coming on to sort of common scandal in a minute, but let's just remind our audience of the state of Britain's military at the moment. We have been told from very good sources that at the moment there isn't a single Royal Navy ship which is fully operational. We've been told there's a 20% shortfall in trained warfare specialists in the Royal Navy. We've had the front pages with the cuts, and of course the proposal is now that we're going to cut the amphibious warfare ships, which means we have no amphibious capability, which means that we don't need the Royal Marines anymore, so we're losing crack forces. We have got sexual liaisons taking place on board of our ballistic nuclear missile submarines. We've got a disaster. We haven't even got any spare parts. We're robbing them from other ships. And we were also told a few months ago that soon there would be no surface-to-surface missiles in the Royal Navy because the procurement of the next generation had failed. We would not have any air-to-surface missiles, the Sea Skewer, the helicopter-fired missiles, because procurement had failed on that as well. We've got massive cuts to the Army, and we've got the RAF at the moment, which is staggering by on one or two aircraft, boasting that it's dropping some bombs on Daesh or ISIS. This, as you say, is complete breakdown, and Fallon has been in post while this situation has grown worse and worse. So what is the problem with Lord Dannett? Is he not in the real world? Has he got too many feathers on his hat? What's actually causing him the problem?
I think he was, my take on that is he's very worried about who's going to get the job. That's what I think now. I think he was very worried when he went to press with this. There was obviously a lot of consideration for him to come and speak. So there would have been dialogue within his network. There would have been some kind of agreement what he was going to say. And what I'm picking up there is he's concerned about who's going to get the job.
David, you're very good at picking up on the nuances, and I'm sure you're absolutely correct on that. I'm going to say from a bit more of a middle ranking position that what I consistently see is a complete and utter lack of guts in Britain's senior military officers and former retired senior officer. A complete lack of guts in telling the public what is really happening. But let's move on and see what Treason May had to say. Well, here she is. She said, "I appreciate the characteristically serious manner in which you, Michael Fallon, have considered your position and the particular example you wish to set to servicemen and women and others." And she went on to praise his diligent service. So there we are, Treason May saying, well, you've decided to step down because of wrongdoing, but I'm praising you for that, and that's an ideal role model. So I thought it'd be interesting to change the words to what they should have been. You're a Conservative MP and Defence Secretary who's touched up a woman's knee, and now indicated that you have committed other misdemeanours, possibly of a sexual or more serious nature, causing you to resign. I'm shocked at this behaviour, these circumstances, and the appalling example you wish to set to servicemen and women and others.
Now that's what she would have said if she had any honour.
Well, what we're seeing is a complete inversion of reality. When you do something wrong, your behaviour is short of the mark, you get praised for it. This man is resigning because of a knee-touching incident, supposedly. No, something a little bit deeper and darker. And what does the Prime Minister do? She praises him and suggests that our armed forces should adopt the same standards. So presumably, if the captain of HMS Vigilant had said, well, I had sex with one of the female officers, I did a good job, I'm going to resign, he would have got a letter from the Prime Minister saying, well done.
And a gong.
And a gong.
Let's move on.
Let's move on. Okay, so here's what Mr. Fallon had to say. He said the culture has changed over the years.
That's the same message that was given by the BBC over Jimmy Savile, by the way.
Good. The culture has changed over the years. What might have been acceptable 10, 15 years ago is clearly not acceptable now. Parliament now needs to look at itself, and the Prime Minister has made very clear that conduct needs to be improved. Now, I'm not sure what he's talking about here. Is he talking about there should be a little less knee touching, because that seems to be the problem? But let's think of this. We had Tim Fortescue, the Tory whip, saying that MPs had been interfering with little boys. They came to the Conservative whips, and the whips fixed it, made it all go away so that those MPs would do as they were asked. So I'm going to say, is Michael Fallon saying that previously child abuse was acceptable as a means of blackmail in the Tory party, but that's not okay now? Well,
let's just talk about the Tory party. I'm going to put that back on screen at the moment because you've put Tim Fortescue on screen there. Of course, Tim Fortescue, Treason May pretends she didn't know anything about Tim Fortescue, but in fact, as we're about to see, although this MP doesn't mention him by name, Theresa May was informed about Tim Fortescue.
Treason May.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for her opening words about the horrific revelations this week. But can I say to her that 3 years ago, I brought evidence to her in this House that whips had used information about sexual abuse to demand loyalty from MPs. I brought that information to her in this House, and I warned her at the time that unless real action was taken, we risked repeating those injustices again today. On 3 occasions, I asked her to act, and on 3 occasions, she did not. So can I ask her, in this of all weeks, for the 4th time, will she finally take concrete action to tackle this?
I will, of course, look back at the questions that the Honourable Lady has said that she raised with me in this House. I assume she raised those with me when I was Home Secretary. I will say to her that I am very clear that the Whip's office, I hope this goes for all Whip's offices across this House, should make clear to people that where there are any sexual abuse allegations that could be of a criminal nature, that people should go to the police. It is not appropriate for those to be dealt with by Whip's offices. Those should go to the police. That continues to be the case. As I say, I will look at the questions that she raised with me, but I'm very clear that we will take action against those where there are allegations that we see and the evidence is there that there has been misconduct. But can I just say to the Honourable Lady, I hope we will all send a message from this House today that we want people in this place to be able to feel confident to bring forward cases, and we need to ensure that those cases are dealt with in a way that people can have confidence on both sides that they will be properly investigated. That means, and I want to see, a good process within this Parliament so that people feel they do not have to go to a party political process in order to have their allegations considered.
in order to have their allegations considered, Brian, I find it fascinating that this discussion in that Prime Minister's questions yesterday was all about the involvement of the Whip's office in all this. We'll see the importance of that shortly. But of course, this is the ongoing scandal, so-called scandal, over sexual improprieties in the House of Commons, which don't apparently involve children at all. At least that's how it's being presented at the moment. No children involved. It's only, MPs touching knees and things like this. And if we look at sort of some mainstream coverage of this, let's look at Private Eye, for example. They tweeted out this morning. This is their new front page, and really it's a bit disgraceful that they're making fun of it in this way. They're making light of it. It's not really very important. We don't have to look at this in any serious way. So the headline says, House of Commons to relocate during building works, and they've got a big picture of a sex shop there. And they tweeted out, that's basically what they tweeted out this morning. So, Private Eye has over the years taken a pretty dodgy line on this type of material, Savile as well, if I remember correctly.
I think Private Eye is a very dangerous magazine, Mike, because what it basically does is takes criminality, it brings it to the surface, so it does expose some really amazing stuff, but everything is done with this tongue-in-cheek. It's all a bit of a joke. So, for example, I remember Private Eye having, I think it was a 6-page sort of pull-out investigation into the NHS. It was really good, but by the next month, they'd moved on to some other trivia. They never went back to their work on the NHS. They never touched Common Purpose. And here they are sneering at child abuse. I think this is a particularly nasty little magazine.
Right, well, that was the front page of the latest issue. The previous issue that had this story, Veal Butcher's Grocer, which is absolutely making fun of Mike Veal's investigation into Edward Heath. They bring everything into this. They bring Robert Greene into it, they bring the Rains list into it, they bring David Icke into it, and basically they're just attempting to undermine, with no evidence presented, just by association, guilt by association with David Icke, for example. They're presenting this as being something which proves that it should be, the whole issue of satanic ritual abuse should be disparaged as a result. Yeah. Let's not look at the issue and maybe prove either way what the situation is. So they're trying to pull the rug out from under the Rains list in particular. So Private Eye, pretty despicable. But then we've got the question of the MPs list, because here is Rory Stewart, Florence of Arabia, who appeared on the list of 40 MPs, which has apparently been published in the United States, published in a redacted form in the UK. Rory Stewart denies any wrongdoing, but so does the woman that he's alleged to have been doing wrong with. She absolutely denies that there was any wrongdoing. She says that Rory Stewart only behaved in the most professional way with regard to her. So what is this all about?
What's the source for these accusations? David, perhaps you'd like to comment at this point before we move on to one of the most stunning pieces of information I think that UK Columns put out.
Well done to that Labour MP, Lisa. How do you pronounce her surname? Lisa
Nandy.
Lisa, yeah, Nandy. Well done to her. Very well put question. And frankly, what Theresa May come back with was just an utter inversion of what had actually taken place. Yeah. From Lisa presenting that stuff to the then Home Secretary. But it's, Brian, I mean, it's not as if we haven't heard this from lots of other people that have presented serious stuff to Mrs May as Home Secretary that's effectively been, shoved away. So no, not good at all. The problem, the principal problem is still there, and it's not been resolved.
And the principal problem, let's call it what it is. The principal problem is that a Conservative whip exposed to BBC camera that MPs had been abusing little boys. The Conservative whip's office then covered up that abuse so that they could control, that means blackmail those MPs to doing their bidding. So where are we with whips now then, Mike?
The whip has been deployed, and in fact the chief whip is now the new Defence Secretary. So here he is, the baby-faced assassin, as he's known himself, Gavin Alexander Williamson. Williamson, by the way, what is his background? Well, if Fallon was inappropriate because he was children's nursery expertise. This guy, what defence expertise has he got? Absolutely none. He previously worked in the Staffordshire pottery industry. He's also worked for an architectural design firm. He was known as the baby-faced assassin when he was working in the pottery industry because he apparently was prepared to make the decisions, ruthless decisions. He was first elected as an MP in 2010, so he has no experience whatsoever, even in Parliament. 5 years, 7 years experience. It's incredible. He magically became Parliamentary Private Secretary to Patrick McLaughlin, who was Secretary of State for Transport. He then magically became appointed as Permanent Private Secretary to David Cameron in October 2013. He was given a CBE in the 2016 Prime Minister's resignation honours, so he and Cameron hit it off very well. And then he was part of the team which got Treason May elected as leader, and he then became Chief Whip in July 2016 when after the general election. And as I say, he became Defence Secretary today. But of course, this is one other thing before I mention that. This man, of course, was a Remainer. He supported he wanted to stay in the European Union, and in the sense of defence union, this is very important, I think. But we've got to remember that this is the Chief Whip who sat with a tarantula on his desk,
frightening his own staff, because some of them had complained to the paper that they found this very scary.
And the other little tidbit to mention, of course, is that the deal that was done, the dirty deal that was done to keep Theresa May in power, the deal with the DUP, where she gave the DUP effectively a £1 billion bung, with a clause in the deal which means they can revisit this after another 2 years, after 2 years, and perhaps get another £1 billion bung. That deal was done. And it was Gavin Williamson that signed the deal, signed the agreement. It wasn't Theresa May. So he was the guy that signed the agreement with the DUP, which is keeping her in power at the moment.
Right, so we've got the situation at the moment, Mike, where the government is rocking because it's now emerged that they're talking Brexit, but behind the scenes, Britain's military being taken apart in order to get it fully locked into EU military unification. That's going on. We've got the scandal over the child abuse in the Conservative Party, where we know, because a whip said so, that the whips were actually covering up the abuse of children. No investigation by Theresa May into that. Here's the Chief Whip now being brought into the position of Defence Secretary. To me, this is the Conservative Party putting all their wagons in a circle because the arrows are coming in. And what have you done? You've taken some of your key people and you've put them in the post. Is any Tory backbencher going to challenge this man on his defence policy?
Wouldn't have thought so. One other little thing, a little coincidence, shall we say, perhaps, and that is, well, if I was to ask the question, who was the last 40-year-old Chief Whip that the Conservative Party had?
Do tell me.
Edward Heath. So there you go. David, what are your takes on our new Defence Secretary?
Well, it looks like the concerns that are being raised are quite valid. Principally a Remainer. We can see the ascent chain here in his political career and who he has backed. Obviously, this is May having to take some pretty radical action here with this. And I think that the overall, just taking the overall defence scene as a whole, why have we got this man coming in? Why have we got a Chief Whip doing this job? It's pretty much unheard of. It's abnormal. So why is it abnormal? And I think this is what I'm going to submit to everyone to have a think about, is that what business is before the government and the MOD that would require a Chief Whip to take control of the MOD, possibly knowing full well how that business would probably be opposed, that would want a Chief Whip to come in and manage it. So they are already telling us, everyone, that the campaign that effectively we're in now to stop PESCO and stop our Army, Navy and Air Force being unified into the EU has to escalate. We have to up our campaign now, rapido, because this guy is going to railroad it through if we don't get a grip.
And is he going to railroad it through under this cover of touching knees? This is the way it seems to me.
Well, I mean, this is, you've got to say to yourself, you don't put a chief whip into this job unless you're expecting a huge amount of opposition, collective opposition, organised opposition, and a campaign. We're already seeing the bones of a campaign here from our end and with Caroline Stevens that are being very effective. What we're getting through and what we've done in the last couple of weeks has made a difference to those particular issues. I'm in no doubt about that.
Well, look, David, I'm just going to say lots of people doing lots of good work, but all our viewers and listeners can help here because I would like to get responses from everybody's MP to this article on the UK column front page at the moment. Brexit, Theresa May's cards are on the table. I would like all our viewers and listeners to get this article to their MPs and ask for a response. And let's keep the pressure on.
Keep the pressure on is an absolutely key thing in all directions, but of course measured, reasonable, polite, because this has the most power. And we're also going to say, don't forget activities in your local area, very important. So the next talk going on at the Seven Stars Hotel, Totnes, is on Tuesday, the 7th of November, on the energy matrix. So encourage local people to go along to that. But it's these sorts of small meetings. You may think it doesn't achieve anything, but actually it helps spread the words at a local community level. And this can be very important. Well, let's just jump back to the subject of really money and defence, because Dannett, Lord Dannett earlier, as Mike said, mentioned that, of course, it's underfunding of the military. This is a complete lie. Because we know that the whole of the monetary system is itself fraud, as the banks create money out of nothing. But here we've got Lord West, who, when he's not partying, is used as the media spokesman on the military. If the Royal Navy loses these capabilities, he's talking about the amphibious capability, our nation would live to regret it. And what does he blame it on? It's all to do with those nasty funding cuts. It's all to do with we haven't got enough money to have a proper Navy. I'm going to say, David, this man is outrageous because, of course, this is nowhere near the truth. The underfunding has been engineered in order to get the primary thing at work, which is the EU military unification. But I also noticed on this page an interesting little inset article, Mod targets exports with budget warships in new strategy. Now that was in September, so it's old news. But of course this man, John Hayes MP, came into my mind because he's involved with this. This is the British nation being told we can't really build ships to defend ourselves. We're going to build cheap ships, and hopefully if we can sell a few, then we might be able to defend ourselves. Where does Mr. Hayes fit into all of this?
Well, he's minister. His portfolio covers all this remit: shipbuilding, maritime, this sort of stuff. So you'll see him popping up at lots of different maritime, shipping, and shipbuilding conferences. So this overlaps his portfolio interests absolutely perfectly. And I've got to say here, really, there's some things that we need to anchor this campaign to, some very specific USPs. We're not dealing with defence cuts. Everyone's got to stop that now. If you see it, jump on it quickly, nip it in the bud. What we are dealing with is EU military unification process that our government are agreeing to. So that's the first point. So it's not about a shortage of money. That's the next lie, because the money is simply being redirected from a national perspective going into the Royal Navy or the Royal Marines or RAF or whatever, where they would go off to BAE and say, right, we'd like some ships or we'd like some aircraft. That's not happening. The money is being redirected from the prime perspective, from Treasury and above, to EU Investment Bank and EU Defence Agency. And there's plenty of money being pumped by the British government, Theresa May and her fellow Conservative cabinet, into that. So it's not about shortage of money. It's about where the money is being directed. And it's those ministers' jobs to direct that money responsibly. So, if we're Brexiting, let's have that money directed into British industry, British jobs, British steel, Wayne David, and all the other guys that are interested in that sort of stuff. Let's start making some things and let's get ourselves out of trouble, because all of the decent engineering in this country, and I'm going to cite the car industry as one. Now, fair enough, we've pretty much had that annihilated, but all of the industry anchors off the defence industry. So if we want to make stuff and sell things and have nice lives and stable families and stable communities, that's a vital sort of, sit rep for everyone to consider. So,
and I'll just add to that, David, I'll add to that promoting that does not necessarily mean that we have to be constantly involved in wars overseas. In fact, if the defence system was working properly, that's the last thing we should actually find ourselves involved in. Well, go ahead.
Absolutely. Look, nobody be under misapprehension here. I am not advocating war or perpetual war. All right. This is about getting our country back together, getting us into a situation where we can make stuff. And if heaven forbid we needed to, could defend ourselves. And as Admiral Sandy Woodward said in 2010, which is obviously when this new defence minister popped up into politics, he said then we couldn't defend either end of the channel. And the guy is right.
Absolutely right. Well, let's come back to the subject of Veterans for Britain. Now, I'd just like to say we did get one or two people who contacted us after we've previously spoken about Veterans for Britain, and they said, I think you're being a bit unkind on them. Now, this surprised me because what we started off saying was that this gentleman, Lee Rotherham, a key researcher for Veterans for Britain, was absolutely hitting the nail on the head. Let's have a look at what he said again. European Union defence plans are associated with the eventual formation of a European federal state. Under the current system of unaccountable governance, this means they will be run by an unelected oligarchy. A nation state that contracts out its defence has ceased to be. So we couldn't give greater praise than to say that Lee Rotherham of Veterans for Britain has absolutely hit the nail on the head. And we are very close to this situation because Theresa May is absolutely down the road, well down the road of handing our military over to the European Union, which means we would cease to exist as a nation. But what we are saying is that we're surprised that if Lee Rotherham in particular is doing such good work for Veterans of Britain, how is it that all of the key people he's involved in and Veterans for Britain is supposedly discussing are not standing up and also warning about the perilous situation we find ourselves. Now, I've had this slide up before, David. I don't know whether you'd like to comment any more. You've mentioned John Redwood. We've already mentioned John Hayes. We've also got Jacob Rees-Mogg there, who many people say, well, he's a saviour because he's all the way for Brexit. But of course, none of these people are standing up and talking to the media and, of course, the British public about what is really happening with EU military unification. Why is there this mismatch between the message that Veteran for Britain is pushing out about what it does and the reality of the effect it gets?
Yeah, it's a superb question, Brian. Thank you. Firstly, what Lee has said there is, and I've said this before on a previous program, is absolutely perfect. I couldn't have put it any better. I'm sure Lord Tevitt wouldn't have put it any better. It's exactly the case. If the government seeks to contracts out our military, Her Majesty's Armed Service, to the EU, we will cease to be a nation, and therefore there is no Brexit. So that's perfect. That's a substantial banner heading there to anchor a campaign over. And I am frankly perplexed as to why these people like John Hayes, that are immediately close to Lee Rotherham, and Steve Baker, a minister. John Hayes is a minister, and John Redwood there, a senior member of the 1922 Backbench Defence Committee, and so on and so forth. All of these people, they're all close to each other. Why are they not talking about this? We've got this on the one hand, Lee Rotherham, as I understand, a potential Conservative Party candidate for MP that's been approved. why aren't these people picking up this campaign and going with him? Because it just beggars belief. They've been shown something here that is absolutely critical. It's happening now. Barnier has put it on the table. Juncker has put it on the table. Macron is openly calling for it. He's set out in terms what he wants, what he expects to happen. And we've got this PESCO thing happening now at the moment. Look at the hashtag campaign that's going on with Caroline Stevens. And this is before the government now to make a decision. So we're in transition with a new minister. Somebody, please throw me a bone. Why aren't these people talking about this?
Well, perhaps they've been whipped, David.
Well, there you go. Yeah, perhaps they've been whipped. Perhaps, Mike, it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Perhaps they've been whipped. Well, we'll leave people to think about that. Let's come in on the media and what the so-called mainstream media have been saying. Here's the mighty Guardian, and it's Polly Toynbee. I want to read a little bit of what she says because I totally agree with it. The fall of Michael Fallon is a mighty blow to Theresa May. Her rickety government has lost one of its old reliables. She could send him out there on Today or Newsnight and he would spout the line of the day faultlessly, unblinking. Even if the line was palpably, laughably absurd, he could say anything with a deadly straight face, a solemn bearing and an articulate pomposity that had at least a veneer of plausibility. So Polly Toynbee has got Michael Fallon to a T in my book. She goes on through this. I won't give you all of this, but she says that she doubts that it was the knee. So that's the right. But she identifies that this man was prepared just to toe the line, and he could say some really stupid things, like saying, for example, that one Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carrier was going to dominate the world with 14 F-35Bs. I mean, for goodness sake. But where she lets herself down is this statement. What an irony it would be if another good old British parliamentary sex scandal brought down this government, and not the Brexit abomination or the extreme suffering caused by austerity or any of the myriad acts of atrocious governance they've been guilty of since 2010. This lady just doesn't understand it, because if she accepts that a good old sex scandal is going to bring the government down, that is the quality of the government. So you shouldn't be surprised that you've got a system of chaos at the moment. So I'm going to say, Polly Toynbee, you get the UK column Crass Journalism Award this week. But not to worry, because Parliament Week is coming up. You normally hit me with today is a day, Mike. So I'm going to give you Parliament Week. It's starting on the 13th of November. And if you haven't heard about it, well, you need to, because this is all about how democratic British government is. And they're going to have a festival to celebrate that. So it explores what Parliament means to the people and empowers them to get involved. And if you get in touch with this organisation with an event, they're going to help you set it up. So this is good stuff. Here is the Speaker of the House advertising. There we are, Parliament Week, engage, explore, empower. I'd say let's not engage with this sort of Parliament, but don't worry, because they've got that sorted out. Because if you think a democracy says, well, if you want to get involved, you can, have a look at partner organisations' eligibility criteria. Here we go. To be a UK Parliament Week partner, you must be an organisation that supports parliamentary democracy in the UK, either explicitly or implicitly. You should not be an organisation that, in the judgment of the UK Parliament Week team, could lead to the House of Commons or UK Parliament Week being criticised because of your inclusion as a partner. So we're a democratic organisation, and you can rest assured that's the case, because we say whether you can be included or not, because you might upset our reputation.
Good stuff.
So if you're there working for child abuse and helping child abuse survivors, you will not be getting into the democracy of the UK Parliament. And if you want to know who's actually running it, well, there's the detail, because it's the Clerk of the House of Commons, who is the man who looks after the corporate interests of the House as a democracy. So there we go. And I'll add in this, what sort of democracy have we got? Well, the shredders are operating again because the House of Commons has been destroying the records of employment dispute payouts to MP staff and 1 million receipts from the expenses scandal, despite the fact they gave a promise to several journalists and other people that they would hold on to that material since there was no cost in keeping it. David, we live in a country which is despicable. There are many banana republics around the world with vicious dictatorships. What's special about UK is the veneer of respectability, while we have these particularly vile people running our country.
Yeah, I think you've just about summed it up there. That sounded a lot like listening to Rodney Atkinson at Free Nations. That's exactly the kind of stuff he was coming out with. If you think you live in a democracy, you are deluded. You don't. And we've got to make some substantial effort collectively. And the important thing here is collectively. We must not be divided because it suits those to have division. And the more division that creates, the more they can carry on with this absolute swamp of nastiness that's currently infesting the Palace of Westminster.
Well, let's right at the heart of democracy, of course, Brian, is a police force. And of course, we're police by consent, aren't we?
Should be.
Should be. Well, don't worry, because the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, yesterday was addressing the National Police Chiefs Council and the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. And this is what she said. She said, because police reform is not an objective which left the Home Office when Treason May did, and whilst policing is in such much better state now than it was in 2010, that's why we've got such rising violent crime in this country. She said, there's still work to be done, and that work is easier to do when we collaborate. I'm really pleased that in the Policing Vision 2025, you've set out a transformative programme for yourselves. This is the National Police Chiefs Council and the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners. This includes making our expertise and resources available to the Police Reform and Transformation Board. Well, what are they going to do with that? Well, they're going to make the police more professional. Apparently, because as the police have been becoming more professional, Brian, they've been doing a much better job, haven't they? No. Right. She said, that's why we continue to work alongside the College of Policing. We're putting in place multiple reforms in this area, such as the Police Education Qualifications Framework, to ensure that policing continues to develop its existing workforce and attract the best recruits. We're also establishing the Licence to Practice scheme, to give those who operate in the most high risk and high harm areas the correct skills and training to do so. So what is the Licence to Practice scheme? Well, in fact, it was a pilot scheme announced at the end of last year by the College of Policing. This is a new approach to vulnerability for policing, and £2 million was awarded to the College of Policing to transform the service's approach to vulnerability at that time. That was just for the pilot scheme. The College of Policing saying that the announcement includes funding to pilot a Licence to Practice approach for child sexual abuse investigators with specific roles to improve the status of officers carrying out these challenging roles and demonstrate the police service's commitment to tackling child sexual abuse. So, correct me if I'm wrong, what they seem to be doing here, Brian, is making sure that only the right people that have a licence to practice get involved with child sexual abuse cases. So, for example, John Wedger couldn't have got involved because he would have pushed too hard and maybe wanted to actually progress this to prosecution. But they're going to make sure they've got the right people with the right training and the right reframing and the right license to deal with child sexual abuse cases.
I think it's becoming clear. Tory wagons circled. How do those wagons run? They run on the oil of corruption and child abuse. Previously, you could call in favours, you could use the whips to cover up that abuse. They're now getting so worried they're going to have to control the whole of social services, the whole of police. And of course, what they're using is reframing techniques, NLP being part of that, but immensely dangerous. The use of applied psychology to help cover up the abuse of children. That's what's going on. David, thank you very much for joining us. We'll obviously have a lot more in the coming days over EU military unification, because if that's achieved, Britain as a nation state will no longer exist. This is the lie of Theresa May. But I'm just going to say before we go that I've been watching the news. We started today with those nasty Russians causing the demise of Michael Fallon with that Putin knee incident. And I'm going to end by the fact that I'm being told that the Russians set up shop in Scotland to force a new independent vote. So this is coming through from the Americans. The Russians are already in Scotland. It's appropriate that tomorrow is Friday. We'll be joined by David Scott, and hopefully David Scott will be able to tell us where he's seeing those divisions of Russian troops deploying in Scotland.
Yes.
There we are. Thank you very much for joining us. We try and keep a sense of humour as we report Britain being destroyed from within. Can we stop it? Yes, of course, but it requires everybody to spread the word as to what's really happening. If you're not already a subscriber of UK Column, perhaps you consider subscribing, because we can only do what we do with your help. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.